Again, good morning and welcome to the 5th Annual United States Japan-Korea Trilateral Symposium, organized by International Student Conferences and generously sponsored by Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA and the Korea Foundation. We thank you all for joining us on this cold and blustery day that impacted hopefully other parts of the East Coast more than us, but we know it wasn't the easiest commute this morning. For those of you that are following us and kind of paying attention today on social media, we'd like to point out that we have created a hashtag for today's conference, and that is hashtag ISCTrilat. And for those of you that are not following international student conferences on Instagram and Twitter, they are at ISC_DC. And so my name is Alexander Evans, and I'll be your Master of Ceremonies for today's event. And I currently work as the Research and Program Coordinator at the Reischauer Center for East Asian Studies within Johns Hopkins SAIS. But perhaps more importantly for today's event, I am an alum of the 63rd Japan-America Student Conference back in 2011. And I think in a lot of ways it was that experience that really continued to motivate me to study Japan and put me on a path that I am in the career I am today because of that experience, particularly given that it was right after the March 11th triple disaster, an opportunity when Japan was not open to many students. To be able to go in there and have a person-to-person exchange was something that I'd say, and it may sound corny, but changed my life. And so before we get started today, we're going to have a couple introductory remarks. So I'd first like to introduce Ms. Linda Butcher, the Executive Director of ISC. Prior to this role, she served as the Director of Media Relations and Public Affairs at the Korea Economic Institute of America, and a legislative researcher for the congressional section at the Embassy of the Republic of Korea in Washington, D.C. She has written and spoken on topics related to technology, security, gender, and the environment. And so we look forward to having her welcome us to today's event.
Thank you, Alex, for that very kind introduction. And thank you all for joining us on this very cold morning. You being here is a testament to your support of the next generation of leaders who will continue to strengthen relations between U.S., Japan, and Korea. On behalf of International Student Conferences, we would like to express our deep gratitude to the supporters who have made this year's week-long forum possible. To the U.S. Department of State and U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, the U.S. Japan Foundation, Korea Foundation, Japan Foundation Center for Global Partnership, and Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. Because of these supporters, ISC was able to fly in 21 of our distinguished executive committee members from the Japan-America Student Conference and the Korea-America Student Conference for this timely and much-needed program. It has truly been an honor working with you all, and we look forward to continue together to empower and support our student leaders. In the course of this week, the executive committee members met with key experts, government officials, media, and the public who are looking to them to continue building relations, to problem solve, and to continue their search for their truth. A common question that was asked to them was, how would you handle the situation? Or what is your background on trilateral relationship that you feel you can continue moving forward in this? And although it's only the 4th day of 2018, there was a lot of discussion about U.S.-Asia relations, about what is going on in the Asia region. There was a lot of discussion of fears or trepidation about what will happen this year and beyond. But as I continue to observe our student leaders interacting with these experts and these officials, I really felt at peace. I really felt that these are people who are taking into account the relationship between the three countries, building relationships and friendships that will last a lifetime, and that will continue to strengthen the relationship no matter however we may move forward. So for those who are watching who are not as familiar with International Student Conferences, we are a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., whose main goals are to prepare and support the future generation of U.S. Japan-Korea. The Japan-America Student Conference was created in 1934 when relations between Japan and America were in decline. Unsure and fearful that the two countries would go to war, students from America and Japan worked together to serve as a bridge of understanding and friendship across the Pacific. Now, 83 years later, JAS continues to thrive, and its mission continues to be just as significant today as when it was founded. In 2008, ISC launched its second student-led conference, the Korea-America Student Conference. Although U.S.-Korea relations has been strong for decades, CASC was founded in a period when the alliance was facing several challenges, and the need for improved cultural understanding and people-to-people diplomacy was vital in order to strengthen relations between the two countries. Now, 10 years later, CASC has grown and evolved to identify and support future leaders who will continue serving as bridges and ambassadors to their countries. So why are these conferences and today's symposium still important? This was a major question I asked at last year's. As we hear again and again, U.S. relations with Japan and Korea are stronger than ever, and they are America's strongest allies. But alliances are not only built by governments, their foundation is the people. It would be unwise for us to not only think only short term. We must begin to pass the torch and begin preparing the next generation of U.S. Asia Pacific leaders. So when looking at this year's conference and this year's symposium, we worked with our student leaders to make sure we're discussing topics of interest to them as they continue in their field. And as I look at them, I see that whatever challenges our three countries may face, we have CASCers and JASCers who built lifelong friendships that will have and will persevere through any obstacles that come our way. If you believe I'm painting a rosy-colored picture, I would recommend you taking a look at the history of our conferences and how it shaped the worldviews of our accomplished alumni. Thus, it is so important that we continue to carry our conferences and symposium to provide opportunities for students to gain leadership skills and to expose people to outside cultures in order to gain mutual understanding, friendship, and trust between the three countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Butcher. We know that there's a lot of effort that goes into organizing the symposium and forum, and the lively and enjoyable discussions will be in no small part to your great effort. Next, it is my great honor to introduce Ambassador James Zumwalt, who will give the final opening remarks. He became Chief Executive Officer of Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA in February 2017, and before that previously served as the ambassador to the Republic of Senegal and the Republic of Guinea-Bissau from 2015 to January 2017. In this role, he was also responsible for policy towards Japan and Korea as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of East Asian Affairs within the U.S. Department of State. And when the great East Japan earthquake and tsunami struck Japan in 2011, Ambassador Zumwalt was serving as the Deputy Chief of Mission in the U.S. Embassy, Tokyo. He also has a 36-year foreign service career spanning across the globe, and so it's our great pleasure to have him here today.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to start by thanking you all for coming today, braving the snow and cold. It just shows how important I think we all feel it is to talk about U.S. Japan-Korea relations. So it's wonderful to see you all today. I, too, wanted to thank Linda Butcher, because I know such a conference is not easy to put on. It's really important, but it requires a lot of effort. And so I wanted to thank you, Linda, and ISC for all the work you've done in assembling such an august group of students who can come and talk together. Briefly on Sasakawa USA, our mission, we're also a nonprofit based here in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to strengthen U.S.-Japan relations through education and research, through programs such as this one. We're delighted to be one of the co-hosts of the 5th Trilateral Forum with the International Student Conferences. This is the third time that we're supporting this initiative to bring together Korean, Japanese, and American university student leaders. I briefly wanted to talk about trilateral relationship between Japan, Korea, and the United States. And several of my predecessors up here talked about U.S. alliances with Japan and Korea. But from our perspective in the United States, it's really important to see the alliance structure in East Asia and how we don't have two bilateral alliances. We really have a web of contacts and a web of relationships. Because it simply would not be possible, for example, for the United States to meet our defense obligations to the Republic of Korea without access to U.S. bases in Japan, and those bases, our access there is because of our alliance with Japan. So from the perspective of the United States, these are not two separate alliances, it's really one network of obligations and of responsibilities that we face together. But also, I think it's natural for the United States, Japan, and Korea to work together and think together because we have so many shared values. The three countries are democracies. We believe in human rights. in the rule of law, and perhaps most importantly, we have a shared love of baseball. We also have many shared interests. Certainly, the Republic of Korea, Japan, and the United States all want to see a stable and peaceful order in Northeast Asia and in the region. We really want to see growing economic prosperity around the world. My last assignment before retiring from the State Department, I was U.S. Ambassador to Senegal and Guinea-Bissau, and we worked very closely with our friends from the Japanese and Korean governments because we had a lot of shared interests there. For example, the United States had a very large Peace Corps presence in Senegal with 250 volunteers, but the two next largest countries sending volunteers to Senegal were Korea and Japan. The Khoika volunteers and the JICA volunteers were also throughout the country doing many of the same things that American Peace Corps volunteers were doing. And as I traveled around Senegal, I really enjoyed meeting with young Koreans and young Japanese who were sacrificing 2 years of their lives to go volunteer overseas to try and make the world a better place. It was really gratifying to see that. But it also reinforced to me how the three countries share common values and how young people in Japan, Korea, and the United States really see themselves as global citizens wanting to make contributions outside their own countries. So I think it's very important for us. I know we're going to have some good conversations today, and you're already having some good conversations, but it's important for us to acknowledge that while we may have differences, our commonalities are more important than our differences, and there's tremendous potential for partnership as we work together to advance our common interests around the world. So programs like this one, where you're going to be discussing some important issues like digital diplomacy and challenges in the workplace, I hope will really create a foundation for even stronger trilateral relations going forward. I look forward to hearing your conversations and your remarks today, and I want to thank you all for inviting me and giving me the chance to talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Zumwalt, and thank you again to Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA for their support of today's event. I'd now like to ask all but the speakers for the first panel head to the stage so they can get mic'd up. And so this first panel today will focus on digital diplomacy. And while I think in a lot of ways digital diplomacy is changing, particularly when we look at, say, the upper level of government, we certainly have a new revolution in political rhetoric on services such as Twitter. But I think it also extends much more than just from that high level. And I hope what the panel, and I think what the panel will talk about today, is looking at how this change in technology and connection impacts us on a person-to-person level. Obviously, before, one of the great barriers to communication and exchange was the distance between all these countries involved in today's trilateral summit. But as we kind of decrease distance through the means of new technological advancements and services, it really paves a new way to change how we interact, not just with those around us immediately, but across the world. And so while they're finalizing the prep, I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's first panel. Ms. Wallace Stanfield is currently a graduate student in the Public Administration and Public Policy program at Auburn University. As an American delegate of the Globalization and Economic Development Roundtable during the 68th Japan-America Student Conference in 2016, she became interested in trade policy and economic development and will continue to pursue these throughout her graduate career. As a student, she has had several years experience working in university-level philanthropy and development, both for university-wide giving and targeted constituency support. She is currently an E-intern for the U.S. Department of State's Virtual Student Federal Service Program, where she provides research support for women's economic empowerment to the Global Entrepreneurship Program. And we look forward to the panel that she'll lead today.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you, Ambassador Zumwalt and Linda, for those remarks, and thank you as well. So to begin the panel on digital diplomacy, I'm going to introduce, again, myself and our 5 panelists, and then allow first the student panelists and then our guest panelists to each talk a bit about their own experiences and perspectives about digital diplomacy in the 21st century. After that, we'll open up the floor to questions and discussion. When we open up the floor to questions and answers, I'd like to ask that the audience members please wait to be called on, and we'll bring you a microphone. And then when you ask your question, please state your name and your affiliation before the question. Thank you so much. So again, my name is Wallace Stanfield, and I'm a graduate student at Auburn University. I currently serve as an E-intern for the Department of State, and I was also a 68th Japan-America Student Conference American delegate, and I can definitely say that I wouldn't be on the path today without that really transformative experience with JASC. So I'd like to thank ISC and JASC again for that. Our student panelists are Rebecca Anderson. She is the chair of the 11th Korea America Student Conference's American Executive Committee. She completed her undergraduate studies at Johns Hopkins University and is currently a U.S. Fulbright scholar pursuing a master's degree in Korean studies at Yonsei University's Graduate School of International Studies in Seoul, South Korea. Our other student panelist is Ayana Sasaki. She is the vice chair of the 70th Japan-America Student Conference's Japanese Executive Committee. She is a sophomore at Kyushu University studying law. She has been selected to go to Korea as a representative of Japanese university students by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Japan. I'm now going to introduce the professionals on our panel. Julie Chung has been the director of the Office of Japanese Affairs since August of last year. She is a career member of the Senior Foreign Service with the rank of Minister Counselor and has served in a variety of positions, including the Deputy Chief of Mission in Cambodia, the Economic Counselor in Thailand, the Chief of Staff for Transition in Baghdad, coordinating civilian military foreign assistance, an economic officer in Tokyo, and coordinating programs with the Korean Energy Development Organization for the Korea Desk in Washington, just to name a few. She received her bachelor's degree in political science from the University of California, San Diego, and her master's in international affairs from Columbia University. Our next panelist is Carl Friedhoff. He currently serves as a fellow of public opinion and foreign policy at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. He previously served as Korea Foundation, Mansfield Foundation, U.S. Korea Nexus Scholar, and is currently a member of the Mansfield Foundation's Trilateral Working Group. Carl was previously based in Seoul, where he was a program officer in the Public Opinion Studies program at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. He received his bachelor's degree in political science at Wittenberg University and his master's degree in international commerce at Seoul National University. Our last professional on the panel list is Shanti Shoji. She is the vice president and co-founder of Kizuna Across Cultures, which aims to promote students' global awareness and communications in foreign languages through a virtual, cultural, and language exchange program. Before co-founding Kizuna Across Cultures in 2011, Shanti worked in Japan for the Japan Exchange Teaching Program and as a program manager for the LABO International Exchange Foundation in Tokyo. She has also served as the Cultural Affairs Coordinator at the Japan Information and Cultural Center with the Embassy of Japan here in the United States. Shanti received her bachelor's degree in Japanese and International Studies from the University of Oregon and her master's degree in International Communication from the American University School of International Service. So I'd like to let Rebecca begin, and if she could, can you tell us about your viewpoint of governments and government actors exercising digital diplomacy, and not only in Korea and the United States and Japan as well, but across the globe? Are there any ways that we can improve the coordination and cooperation of these communication strategies?
Well, first of all, I'd like to
Sorry. I apologize.
I'd just like to thank ISC so much for this opportunity. It's kind of a surreal moment to be sitting up here amongst such distinguished speakers who are far more qualified to speak on this subject than I am. But when we're talking about digital diplomacy, talking about new approaches to diplomacy and to changing international policy agendas, this is the world that we as student leaders are going to inherit. So I think it's very, very relevant that we're part of the discussion. I'm happy to be here today. So even though I'm not South Korean myself, as a representative of the Korea America Student Conference, I will do my best to kind of speak from a South Korean perspective and to do it justice in the discussion today. So going back to just about digital diplomacy in today's governance, in terms of where South Korea is at today, this country, it's very much seen as very technologically advanced. So I think that moving forward, South Korea as a nation is very much uniquely positioned to take advantage of these new approaches to diplomacy. I think that there's a lot of area to thrive moving forward. And we've definitely seen in the past few years more efforts towards this. I, for one, am very appreciative of the fact that I can take a 40-minute subway ride in Seoul and be connected to free Wi-Fi the entire time. In terms of things like internet speed and connectivity, smartphone ownership, social media usage, these are things that South Korea is a leader in. And so I think that moving forward, it'll be very interesting to see how South Korea, really takes up the mantle of digital diplomacy and incorporates it into its traditional approaches to reaching out to the rest of the world. I think that at the current moment, we have President Moon Jae-in, who ran a very successful social media campaign during the election process. We have the new Minister of Foreign Affairs, who has a background at the UN. So these are very high-level officials who are positioned to kind of take Korea into this next stage. And moving forward into this new kind of era where digital diplomacy is not just novel, it'll become a norm. I think I have a few actually suggestions for how South Korea can make some changes moving forward, just from my own perspective. Again, by no means an expert, but I think it would be very pertinent for the government to, and beyond just South Korea, it's very important to clearly define the objectives for digital diplomacy. It's not just about jumping on a bandwagon, it's about really taking advantage of these natural resources that are already there. I think it'll really help South Korea kind of fully realize its globalized potential. Another kind of area I would personally really like to see is to see an expansion of English social media presence and also related dedicated staff across all platforms. We have Twitter, always Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, the list goes on and on. I think there have been some inroads made in this. Korea Clickers, is doing very, very well on Facebook. There's a new, actually, a Korea Foundation initiative in a restaurant guidebook app. Kakao Taxi actually just had an update where it's now in English, so I also very much appreciate that. But I think that this could be an area moving forward where we could see kind of some more growth in. And then my last kind of point I would like to drive home is that it may be a bit presumptuous of me as a young person speaking on this panel, but I do think that when we're talking about digital diplomacy, there is, young people do seem to go hand in hand with that. To us, these digital tools are not so much new. We grew up with this. We have a different way of viewing how these things can be used, and we're very familiar with it. So I would like to see, South Korea taking advantage of the generation gap, putting more trust in younger people. And I think this will be a specific challenge just based on kind of the hierarchical society that it currently has. But there's a certain amount of risk-taking and trust that has to come along with approaches to digital diplomacy. So I think that moving forward, South Korea's position to become a leader in this field, I'm very excited to see moving forward. And I think that this could also be, very pertinent to the discussion on trilateral relations.
Fantastic, thank you. And I definitely agree with, digital diplomacy, increasing engagement with the public. I think it's a great platform to kind of get more people engaged in public administration and politics and things like that. Ayano, are there any ways you think the public sector actors can engage with the public digitally besides current popular social media platforms? And is there still a value in people-to-people diplomacy and that,
Yeah. About digital diplomacy, since I came from Japan, I wanna share about something about Japanese issue. Then Japan started to make use of digital diplomacy efficiently. So for example, they made their social media policy, and basing on those kind of policy, they have a lot of SNS account now. For example, Twitter and YouTube, or Instagram and Line. And Line is a really famous Apple in Japan as a communication tool. So if you add our government to your friend, you can get a message from your government directly. So for instance, last December, some North Korean ships were washed up on Japanese coast. So, but since abduction problem, we have abduction problem between Japan and North Korea. So Line account, our government send us our message and also images directly, so we can gather information directly from our governments now. So this, I am convinced that digital diplomacy can be useful for our country's diplomats. But I guess now in Japan, like we are just sharing the information among Japanese people, and also like especially the people who are interested in diplomatic issues. So like from my perspective, I have some like I guess like we can improve something. Like for example, like a MOFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, can spread the information what they want to tell people like to know to all over the world, or like they can promoting like transparency of diplomacy by using digital diplomacy, and also like they can collaborate with like a people-to-people diplomacy with digital diplomacy. So like for example, like I joined there's some diplomatic program like between Japan and Korea last summer, and they asked it was supported by the MOFAR and also like Korean Foundation, and they asked us when I put there some picture or sentence about the problem, they asked us like to use slash using the hashtag like Genesis 2070 or like a Korea-Japan Youth Exchange Program and something like that. So like if we can collaborate with digital diplomacy and their cultural diplomacy and people-to-people diplomacy, we can expect more like possibility of diplomacy in our fields. So yeah, from my personal experience, so since I joined a lot of like diplomat programs, like for example, Tomodachi program supported by U.S. Embassy or something, like so, like I feel like since we have a digital diplomacy and we can expect, we can make the diplomat issue more like like involved to other people, or common people, but like I guess the cultural diplomacy and people-to-people diplomacy still have a value, their own value. So yeah, my suggestion is to collaboration of between the diplomacy, digital diplomacy, and cultural diplomacy and people-to-people diplomacy. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. I think that's definitely, collaboration is definitely important in kind of bringing those two methods together, especially going into the 21st century and with all the technology that we seem to have today. Julie, I'd like to ask you, as you know, how can we, as current public administrators or government government representatives, and even future ones, how can we create and maintain relationships of integrity and transparency in our communications with the public, whether it's cross-cultural communication or things like that? Is it possible to do this through digital media, or does that still come across as impersonal? Or I mean, where can we go with this, if you think?
Well, first I want to say thank you for the organizers, Sasakawa and IC, for organizing this event. And as Jim really laid out, we're talking about shared values here. And as this personally piqued my interest as a Korean American born in Seoul, Korea, but working on Japan issues now for the U.S. Department of State. This trilateral forum is really the perfect place for me to participate and be a part of. So thank you for inviting me today. So I'll talk more about the State Department's view of digital diplomacy and how we've utilized it and how we've adapted to the changing environment of communications. Now, communications in the 20th century, diplomacy as we know it, was really restricted to how governments communicated to other governments. There was no government communicating to other populations, to the public directly. What changed all that? Radio. With the huge expansion of radio and the popularity of radio, people could communicate directly. Now, fast forward, and we were not only focusing on the messaging of radio, but also people-to-people ties and developing programs like the Fulbright program, which some of you have been involved in the past. So now fast forward to after September 11th. After those attacks, Secretary Colin Powell established the task force on e-diplomacy. And following on his steps, Condoleezza Rice also created a transformational diplomacy. And something that she told the Georgetown crowd on 2008 was she said that this requires the modernization of the State Department. We need to trust our people to manage greater amounts of risk. We need to get our people the best technology to liberate them from embassies and offices so we can work anytime and anywhere. We need to be better at fostering and rewarding creativity and initiative, innovation and independent thinking. So this really spurred a lot of the programs at the State Department. And Jared Cohen, at the time 24 years old, came into the State Department as Secretary Rice's staff on e-diplomacy initiatives, and had the privilege of meeting him when I was based in Baghdad, Iraq, when he brought Jack Dorsey from Twitter out there to see how we could engage very young audiences in Iraq in using technology to effect change. So following that, Alec Ross, also Senior Advisor for Innovation, took it to the next level of how do we use social networking and web video and social media to reach large numbers of people that we otherwise couldn't. We did things like text message reminders so that HIV patients could know when they had to go for checkups, how to develop public works in the most remote and rural countries in Africa and elsewhere. So we were leapfrogging from communities from using a cash culture to mobile banking, and all these were supporting our diplomatic initiatives. So how do we do this when it's the State Department and the U.S. government's reputation we've been a little bit risk averse, and all these changes in diplomacy and digital diplomacy are happening very rapidly. So when we looked at the Obama administration, that was really the first administration that utilized Facebook and Twitter in that expansive way. And we saw that flourish during the last presidential campaign, and of course now under President Trump, the use of Twitter as a way of direct messaging. Just for comparison, in 2013, the State Department had 29 million visitors to its main website, www.state.gov. And in calendar year 2017, that number is now 48.5 million page views, of which 28% were on mobile devices. So as we can all attest, mobile devices are the way we connect, we learn, we live, we date, we shop, and that is a way that diplomacy must adapt to using that to deliver our messages. And recently, during President Trump's visit to Asia, because of the 24-hour news cycle, we're not just depending on media outlets, but Twitter and Facebook. And so we really worked hard to connect the messages, the images from the White House and State Department and others to get our message across on the president's themes during that visit. So as we look at the social media challenges to come and how we're using it strategically, one example of is how we want to increase U.S. Japan student exchanges and to be able to increase that by 2020 to double that amount. And so one of the things we're using is social media analytics, a tool that we did not have in previous years. So we can look at targeted groups of college students 17 to 25 years old and respond to their specific concerns and then address those issues specifically. And we also use digital diplomacy to decode what diplomacy means to the average American. If you look on state.gov, we now have how each state in the United States contributes to how the State Department can contribute to that state's development and economic growth. And so when you have this marketplace of free exchange, of course, there are challenges because anybody can post anything at any time. And we have false information, we have things that are not true. And so that is one of the challenges as diplomats that we have to address and encounter right away. And in my own career, I've seen digital diplomacy play a powerful tool, and I'll end with two examples. When I was in Hanoi, Vietnam in 2004, we had our first live web chat with our ambassador at the time, Michael Marine. So that was unheard of at the time. In Vietnam, the censors are very strong in terms of coming in and telling us what we could interview, what programs we can organize, what cultural music programs were allowed to be performed. And this live web chat where we didn't have any previews or censorship, where the ambassador could talk directly to the general audiences in Vietnam, was really life-changing. And I think it was just a start of how we were using digital diplomacy in a country like that. The second example is Cambodia. I just spent 3 years in Cambodia as a deputy chief of mission there. It's a poor developing country with a GDP per capita of $1,200 and 16 million people, but 2/3 of the population is under the age of 30. So very ripe for digital diplomacy. And this is where the Cambodians access information mainly through social media. That's where they seek news and other entertainment and information from social media, then TV, then radio. So utilizing that, the embassy Facebook, which started off with maybe 1,000 followers in the first year, within a few years had jumped incredibly to over 1.3 million followers. And that's in a country where 4 million are using the internet. But we have captured the audience of 1.3 million Facebook users. And that's where we can relay information about what's going on in the world, presidential announcements and speeches, statements on human rights situation in Cambodia, again, without any censorship or interference. And it allowed a forum where people could also comment on the Facebook page. Now, some were negative, but many were positive. And it allowed really democratic free speech to flourish, where people can see that we have a forum where we accept criticism and we accept praise, and it was a forum for all. So that's two of the ways that I've seen how the State Department has used digital diplomacy to really empower, to connect to people, and to listen. And I think that would be a tool. The huge range of tools in digital diplomacy will continue to revolutionize, and we'll have to adapt to. And I think it will continue to be a source of flourishing diplomacy between the United States and other countries.
Fantastic, yeah. And so, like, with your experience abroad, was Facebook, or something like that, like the best digital diplomacy tool that you seemed to work best for your organization at the time, or like the live web chat? Did that seem like the best way to do that? Fantastic. And do you think technology has improved diplomatic relations, especially overseas, for our government? If you can,
I believe so. Yes,
in our favor?
It provides an avenue for people to connect to people where they otherwise wouldn't. If you look at the Twitter followings of President Trump or Prime Minister Modi or the Pope, I mean, you have average, everyday citizens who feel like they can connect to those people. And I can't tell you how many times I've met people on Twitter and then met them months or years later in person. Mm-hmm. And it makes you feel closer to that person and what they've stand for and what they've said in the past. So I know that Twitter and social media and Facebook has its challenges as well, and we can't rely on it purely. The people-to-people, face-to-face exchanges are absolutely important, but I think it does help us as a tool in diplomacy.
Fantastic, and that definitely goes on what had just been mentioned. I'm going to turn now to ask Carl, do you think, is there a best digital platform to use for diplomacy? Whether it's maybe what we just mentioned, or if there's another one perhaps, is there a best strategy to approach how we absorb and use information that we receive digitally in diplomatic ways, and how can we relay that to others as well, and whether that applies domestically or through cross-cultural communication.
So for getting the message out, I think it's always Twitter.
Okay.
For me, there's been a natural division in what I've seen, that the personal is now on Facebook and the professional side is trending towards Twitter.
Okay.
But as I think about it, something always comes to mind. I think there's been a lot of positivity about digital diplomacy. Of course, it's going to stick with us. I'll offer a little bit of a different take. People who are in public opinion don't often think highly of social media because we haven't seen effects of social media campaigns on elections. So everyone has this idea that, yes, there's a big effect if you're really out there on social media, you have Twitter campaigns, but as far as affecting the vote, that's not exactly been shown, and that's in a number of countries where it hasn't quite carried over. The kind of thing I think about a lot, if you've seen the Stanley Kubrick movie, 2001, A Space Odyssey, getting a lot of blank looks, so I'm guessing maybe it's a little too old for this crowd. But in the beginning of this, there's this scene where it's called The Dawn of Man. They have all these apes out, and this ape has a big bone in his hand. He's kind of idling around with it, playing around, and he starts to hit things, and then quickly he starts to break things, and then he realizes that this bone can be a tool. And as he's doing it, he's smashing things, and he's envisioning all of the things that he can hunt, all the food he can have. And so then it's kind of this, I'm going to unlock the power of civilization. In the very next scene, he has this bone in his hand, and a rival tribe comes up, and then he murders someone with it. And so that, to me, is basically what Twitter is. Right? I mean, it has the power to bring people together, to really unlock these things, to share ideas, but you get on there and within 1 minute someone gets murdered. Like if the Godwin's law, any kind of conversation will naturally trend towards a comparison to Hitler. And you see that all the time on Twitter. That's what happens. So, to go back to the element that Julie brought up, Digital diplomacy is going to be with us, and it's important, but the human element will never go away, nor should it. That is incredibly important, because as was mentioned, you have that context for the person. And all of these social tools are really what you make of them. And too often, I think, they get away from us, and they take us in a very bad direction. Not to follow up, this is probably not a great follow-up to saying take us in a bad direction, but the president's tweets, when we do polling on this at the Chicago Council, and not only our polling, but other places of polling, the public does not want the president to tweet. And that comes out very clear. That's Democrats, that's Republicans. Even when we divide Republicans into core Trump supporters and non-Trump Republicans, basically minorities of even them say the president should stop tweeting. So it's not seen as effective. It's not seen as furthering U.S. strategic goals. So coming back to the human element, I think that's why these kinds of conferences are so important, and especially at a young age, to meet people that are going to share some of the same interests, and then I think you'll find that over time, your lives will intertwine in and out of each other. It was mentioned how you meet someone on Twitter, you follow them, and then months later or years later, you actually meet them in person. The people that are here now, you'll end up interacting with in very unusual ways that you never would have imagined in the future. So you'll see them move up into new jobs, and then you'll move up into new jobs, and you'll come into contact. So I think this kind of thing is going to be the backbone of diplomacy of the future.
Fantastic. And if you can speak to this, how can we, decide and filter what statements may be made on digital platforms or through digital diplomacy tools and things like that? How can we kind of filter out what statements or what concerns are legitimate concerns to the public or other nations? Which ones speak authoritatively and which might not speak as authoritatively?
So my approach is to listen to nothing. So I have a very strong filter. So anything that comes out through Twitter, through Facebook, I take with an incredible grain of salt because I think it's just all PR branding, essentially. Of course, they're trying to get their message out, and that's what needs to happen. But you have to be much more dedicated if you're trying to look at some of these problems. So you take this one piece of information from Twitter, and you have to go and do the background work, look at the news. Look at the analysts, look at the experts. So this idea that digital diplomacy it's going to be big and it's going to be there. But we have to be dedicated about how we use it, who we listen to, and making sure that we do our due diligence in putting other pieces together to get a fuller picture.
Absolutely, absolutely. Shanti, I was wondering if you could maybe speak to this as well with your educational kind of program experience with cross-cultural and cross-communication kind of experience, if you can kind of add on to that and see what your perspectives are on that as well.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much to Linda and everyone at ISC for having KAC, as we go by for short, Kizuna Across Cultures here as part of this important discussion. So thank you so very much, Linda. So it was the tsunami in 2011 happened in Japan. And that was kind of the impetus or what brought about our organization and our program. I'm a former JET participant, so the Japan Exchange Teaching Program, years back. And so myself and some other former JETs and some of our Japanese friends really wanted to do something for those in Japan when the tsunami struck. We were all here in DC. And basically, we came up with an idea to connect students via the internet. We didn't have a lot of money, and we wanted to do a project that would bring more than just what our donation could give. So basically, what we've created now and have been doing for 5.5 years is our virtual cultural and language exchange called Global Classmates. So we take a class of high school students in the US studying Japanese, and a class of high school students in Japan studying English, and we connect them via an e-classroom that we create for them. It looks a bit like Facebook, but it's on a kind of a an educational website platform, so it's monitored and secured. And for 6 months, those students post messages to each other. So due to the time difference, it's asynchronous. Mostly it's not like web chat. It's all just posting messages. And they talk about fun themes that they like to talk about, like school, music, or what food they're eating, or what's cool. we do fun topics like what's on your bucket list, or if you could be anyone for a day, who would you be and why? So students write, in the US they write both in English and Japanese, and in Japan they write both in English and Japanese, allowing them to practice what they're studying and allowing the other side to learn from a native speaker of the language they're studying. So it's very collaborative. So it's been really interesting to hear more from the government, the policy sector, and kind of public opinion, and from the students as well. We've kind of taken these tools and brought it down to the educational level. And I think what's been hit upon as well is really important is that, like you were saying, Carl, the human connection, and everyone is saying the human connection is so important. And we don't see digital diplomacy as a digital versus in-person, but rather digital diplomacy is the pipeline to in-person, right? So we all have had an experience in our life that somehow sparked interest in us and a flame to really want to be curious about international things or learn a language. There's a program in Japan called Tobitate, and they do international exchange programs for students in Japan. And they have a large amount of data about the students going on their programs. And the big thing they found is that everyone had that moment. For one kid, it was the new international student from the US who he fell for. And all of a sudden, he wanted to speak English or learn about her culture. For someone else, it's when they were in school, someone came and talked to them about another country. So I think it's really important that with digital diplomacy, we kind of, or these digital tools, we think about creating kind of touch points for students, especially our youth, to somehow get interested in furthering and kind of opening up their world. So I think all of these things are really important. And I think as you were talking about, right now, we only work with the U.S. and Japan, but having South Korea with all of their technological advances, I think having something that's in an educational way into each school or each classroom would really help. And with our program, the majority is the 6 months of writing messages online, but we do have omiyage exchange, kind of gift exchange, and we also do a video competition. And we currently, as of this past summer, we're very excited to add on a summit, so the Global Classmates Summit, which, thank you so much to Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. The U.S. Embassy in Tokyo and Center for Global Partnership was free. Actually, our Global Classmates virtual exchange is also free, so students, teachers pay nothing. U.S. Embassy, Tomodachi, U.S. Japan Foundation are also big funders. So I think having both resources and funding is important to get the youth really energized. But like with the summit, when we brought people in person, they'd already talked to each other for 6 months online. So it's kind of this, you met in the Twitter online sphere and you get to know each other. But then when you meet each other, it's like you've never met, but you have. So there's this awkward, like, do we hug? What do we do? But our students only had 8 nights together here in DC, but it was amazing how quickly they could really bond with each other and then learn and help each other. So I think looking at digital diplomacy as a pipeline and a way to really allow our youth to gain those touching points and those opportunities despite their socioeconomic background, or if they live in rural US and they don't really have access to international things, it really allows for that. So I think that's about it for that.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, and absolutely, I agree with, your Kizuna Cross Cultures and the ISC and programs like this. It's certainly a way that we can kind of inoculate and train young people to interact with other people through cultural and digital platforms and to get more involved in politics, international relations, and engagement in that nature. I guess I'd like to open up the panel. If I have a question. I just lost the question. How much of an impact does cultural diplomacy have in conflict mitigation, whether it's through educational cultural exchanges or any other type of exchange? In what ways can cultural diplomacy is it insufficient by itself, or how can we kind of supplement this, these strategies? Is it, just by combining digital diplomacy with people-to-people diplomacy, or are there any other methods or strategies or thoughts on that? Anyone would like to go?
Speak on that real
Please
quick?
go ahead, Shanti.
That's one piece I forgot to, an important piece I forgot to mention, but the impact that our virtual exchange has, which goes to that. So we do a very robust exit survey. The teachers agree that they will do it, so we have about 90% return rate. So last year we had over 1,100 surveys from our students, and it shows that 90% of the students are now more motivated to communicate in the language they're studying. They're more motivated to study abroad, to look into those opportunities. They're more motivated to kind of engage with international things. So if online or these digital exchanges can be implemented correctly, they have a huge impact. And then, like we showed with the summit, it just moves on to them wanting to do further things. So I think it has a big impact if it's implemented correctly. Yeah.
Fantastic.
I'll go ahead and say what you're talking about is essentially what is known as the contact theory. Okay. And in the academic literature, that is not proven. So, if you come into contact with someone, the theory is that you'll grow a fondness for them, but the other opposite is that you can grow to hate them more. And within the academic literature, it's shown both ways. It's very controversial. And so this idea that the more you interact with someone doesn't necessarily mean that you'll grow this fondness. So I think that speaks to it's really about how you engage and the type of people you engage with. So again, that human element of surrounding yourself with like-minded people can be important, even though that will run the risk of creating that bubble. But just I think we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves when we assume that just interacting with someone will automatically predispose you to understanding them or liking them more.
Okay.
I'm going to take the opposing view and say that it does help, and anything helps. And I think we've learned long ago that diplomacy is not about an official and official sitting across the table in a meeting room. So any other type of diplomatic interaction, whether that means people to people, culture to culture, students to students, we think that all contributes to a greater mutual understanding. And I'll just give one quick example of something outside of my professional world. But in the 1990s, I don't know if you recall, there were huge riots in Los Angeles after a African-American student was shot and killed by a Korean-American grocer. It fueled intense tensions between the Korean American and the African American community in Los Angeles. At the time, my father, as a Korean American active community worker, set up a program so that we can have exchanges between inner city African American students and Korean students. And this continued for several years. And did it completely solve interracial tensions? No. But it did create a much greater understanding and appreciation of the various cultures that we're dealing with. So I'm a big believer in those kinds of interactions having a positive effect.
Fantastic. And another question, in what ways can civilian and government entities both cooperate and coordinate digital diplomacy programs, globally? Like how are we able to coordinate and how are they able to cooperate, if anyone wants to tackle that one?
I mean, I think from someone in the field, we're a nonprofit, and we, look for anyone who wants to fund us. So the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo was great. They're the ones that I went to Ambassador Roos's office in August 2012, it must have been, and said, okay, we tried a pilot. I had all these papers with maps, like these are all the schools we're gonna work with. And he was like, great, this is awesome. How can we support you? So I think having just that energy within the government of willing to take risks, as you talked about, is important to kind of try different things. And we work with, there's private companies, Itoen, for example, or Sanjay, also fund our programs. So I think there's organizations that can kind of bring those together, but definitely I think there's a lot to be said for, and Tomodachi is actually a great, I know it's not digital diplomacy, but Tomodachi coming together, private and public, can do a lot of good.
Fantastic. And then I have one last question on, messaging. What are some ways in which government administrations can maintain consistency throughout? Speaking about the increased traffic that the State Department's website has received, and then individual actors and and their own messaging through their own digital platforms. How can we maintain consistency, and how, if we can't maintain consistency necessarily, how can they correct mistakes in their messaging and conflicting points of views? If you would also like to tackle that as well.
Well, I think Carl is correct when he says, you can't base everything on one tweet in itself.
Yes.
And so that is absolutely correct. And policies and strategies are not relayed through one tweet, but it is a part of it. So, let's say a government official, a U.S. government official tweets something, and then we follow up with a statement from the State Department or White House. Then we have a press conference, and then we have an interview. So it's all part of a larger piece, I think. So the tweet becomes a part of that messaging, I think, to make that consistent.
Okay. I'd like to open up the questions to the public if anyone has them. Again, we're going to go around with microphones. So if I'll go ahead and let you go here since he's right in front of me. And then instead, please state your name and your association for the question.
My name is Ethan Matos. I'm a recent graduate from Hobart and William Smith Colleges, and I'm currently serving as the American Vice Chair for the 70th JASC. So my question is, while technology has made information more accessible, it's also become incredibly easy to weaponize social media by spreading falsehoods and misinformation. As we're learning from the current investigation into Russia's interference into the 2016 elections, it's now possible for foreign entities to run calculated, targeted misinformation campaigns across the globe. So what effect does this have on global diplomacy, and does the panel believe that we should regulate these means of communication to prevent digital attacks from foreign entities?
Let our State Department colleague handle that.
No, I think as Carl has explained as well, I mean, that false information is really widespread now, faster than and more than ever. And terrorist actors also use social media to recruit. So it is not always a positive influence. There are the negative aspects of social media and Twitter use as well. But I think despite all the flaws and the freckles, it is overall a powerful tool. And we should correct those errors, correct those messages. And again, as Carl said, do your homework. You have to have integrity in terms of seeking out the information from a wide range of sources. Don't rely on one Twitter feed. Don't rely on one news source. Really broaden that knowledge to a diverse news outlets and sources for information.
And I think just to add, I think it also shows how important it is for us to get to know each other. And it gives even more way of why digital diplomacy is so important. And it's accessible, it's largely free. So I just think we need to better kind of harness those tools and understand how to incorporate them into our education systems or use them in ways that allow us to further get to know each other. So when we hear things, we can say like, is that really true? Or, rather than just eat it all up.
Another question from the audience?
Did you have a question?
The gentleman over there.
My name is Leonard Campbell, notable affiliation. My question is for Carl. One, I appreciated the 2001 reference. I have seen the movie, and I think it's pretty spot on. My question is about the use of Twitter and your polling data on the president's use of it. I wonder if the issue that you're finding is more one of content versus the medium, but if it's actually the medium, then what does that actually say about digital diplomacy?
Well, happy I reached at least one person with the 2001 reference. That's a success in and of itself. On the content versus medium, I think it's specifically the content. We didn't include a lot of information about that. I think we had a list of, do you view these approaches as effective ways to achieve U.S. foreign policy goals? And long list, I can't remember actually all of them. Of course, the one that sticks out right at the end was Twitter, and we had done this on the advice of one of our foreign policy advisory board members who had come in. And yeah, so it was specifically content on that. Other things were seen as effective, and again, I'll have to go back and review, and we can talk about that later if you like. But yeah, I don't think there are any problems with the medium, specifically just what is being put out there.
The next question, sorry. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Jenna Gibson. I'm with the Korea Economic Institute. So when I was going to journalism school 5-10 years ago, everyone was really, really excited about all the things we could do with the internet, social media, a way for people to interact with the media, respond to the content that they're seeing. And now we're seeing a lot of newspapers online shutting down their comment sections because it just turned into a huge fight and there's no actual value to that they're seeing. So I'm wondering, from the diplomacy side, that was another thing that people were really excited about. We can hear back from the audience that we're trying to reach. It's not just a one-way conversation. I'm wondering if you're seeing a similar thing and if there is value to that conversation or if it's just kind of what Carl is saying and people ultimately ending up in fights and just being trolls.
I don't know if this will get at your underlying question, but one of the things, and this goes back to actually the question about limiting free speech and if we have to go into some of these things, but in Korea they use a real name system essentially, right? So if a lot of ways that you're going to have content, you're going to log on to things, basically you have to go in through a real name policy by entering in some of the numbers. And I think we are, here in America, we tend to think very highly of free speech. We protect it at all costs. That's great. But we also need to look at other options, and not all countries have that very specific free speech policy, and they do just fine. Doesn't prevent the fights. There are still a lot of these things going on, but there is some measure of accountability, and I think that's what is missing essentially.
I think it's important to create the rules of the road. So at Facebook pages, many of them like U.S. Embassy Facebook, so we have rules on users, and if you post something that we deem as dangerous or inappropriate, we do remove them. So I think people are aware of that caveat. Having said that, I think that robust debate, again, whether it's criticizing the U.S. government for anything we post or not, I think it is healthy. And to see really what people have in their minds in terms of a certain policy or a certain viewpoint, I think that is pretty useful in this day and age as well.
Fantastic. Next question.
Hello, my name is Roy Lee, and I am on the 70th Japan-America Student Conference Executive Committee. And my question is for actually the two student panelists that we have today. So I experienced a huge generation gap, like Rebecca mentioned, using social media compared to how my parents and my grandparents use social media and how we consume information. I was criticized by my grandparents for always getting news from Twitter a while back, but now I can say that, well, I'm getting information directly from the president, so. So my question is, how do you see, how are we as young generations unique in using social media? What is the difference how we interact with it than the older generations, and how is that affecting the future of social diplomacy, social media, and how information will be consumed in the future?
Well, yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that question there. And I think that's kind of at the core of this entire discussion is that, digital diplomacy, young people, definitely goes hand in hand. So moving forward, as we kind of take up the mantle, there's a lot to be discussed there. Actually, from my discussions with Ayano here, it's kind of very interesting to see that how we consume information online has already kind of established this connection and this trust. And especially between South Korea and Japan, especially with popular culture, being very much portrayed through the digital means, there's a connection there. There's something to work off of. And so I think it's very exciting moving forward with the new means that we have, with how familiar we are with it, as we kind of grow up, as these tools develop, how that's going to influence trilateral relations moving forward.
Yeah, I think like my generation, our generation, we are so flexible for that our SNS medias, but like I think personally, like before going into Korea, I was just exposed to the information from media. So like, that if I am living in Japan, like we are exposed to the information from media, like made by our, upper generation. So like, yeah, we got a lot of information about Korea, like, historical parts, especially historical parts. So like before going to Korea, I was kind of biased by that media made by our upper generations. So after going to the Korea by that through that program, I noticed that this is a real Korea. Like it's kind of different from what I expected. So I just focused on that like a historical part or like diplomat problem between Japan and Korea. But you know that Korea has a lot of aspects, like a cultural aspect, the music or language, or like the food or everything. So like I could not get a whole picture from that media. So yeah, even if we are so flexible and we can get a lot of information from SNS, still we need to know like in that country in real meanings. So like it's a kind of difficult to express, but like still we need to like keep our attitude like to know the real in that country. Even if we are so flexible, then we can get a lot of information from SNS. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Is there another question? Yes.
Alexander Evans, Reischauer Center. One of the themes that's really come across in this panel is the importance of technology and digital media as a catalyst, whether that be for good or for bad. And I'll give an advance warning that this is related, but not as close to some of the other questions. So what does this mean in terms of the education systems in these three countries? Because if this is a catalyst, if these tools are important and can be used for either incredibly good deeds or incredibly bad, are each of these three countries, how are they approaching educating their citizens about the use of technology? Is one doing better than the other? Are some of them doing poorly? Maybe both from the professionals and from the students, what have you seen that indicates where the future is going in this regard in terms of educating citizens how to use digital media?
I have experience only with the U.S. And Japan, so I can only speak to that. But with our program, so for example, this year we're working with 31 high schools in each country, so 62 high schools altogether. I think in the past 6 cycles we've worked with at least 100 schools, high schools in each country. So I'm gaining my response from that experience. The U.S. is, if I'm comparing the two, much more open to this technology idea and allowing students to use it and learn from it than Japan is. The U.S. is, a lot of schools have Google Classroom, so they're using that. In Japan, I haven't heard of anyone using Google Classroom or things like that. It was also difficult to find a platform that would be able to be accessed through the Japanese kind of firewall that they had. YouTube isn't available. Facebook in both countries isn't available. Skype isn't available. All these tools aren't available. So I think the U.S. has a lot of work to do as well in regards to that. But I think one really important thing is allowing youth to understand what the internet can do, both good and bad. We all know of bad things that have happened when people tweeted things they shouldn't have, adults. There's a lot of things that happened online that are really not great things, but students won't be able to figure out what they can do until they can kind of, in a safe environment, play around with it a bit. So I think it's really important that we teach our youth how to be, digital citizens almost, and do that safely and do that well, and understand kind of how to read information too and take it in, and that it's not all real. So yeah.
Anyone else? Okay. Is there another question? Yes, first.
Hello, my name is Hitomi, and I am an exchange student from Japan. And then I currently studying political science at American University. And I really understand that this kind of digital diplomacy can promote students to connect with each other, and then we three countries enjoy high level of technology. But I want to think about serious situation that we three countries are in the imminent threat of North Korea launching missiles, and then I want to know how can we use this kind of digital diplomacy to deal with those kind of threats to our three countries.
I feel like the digital diplomacy topic has veered a little bit onto the North Korea policy, but I think similar to what we've said before, utilizing all three governments in terms of government to government to government, our statements that make sure we are continuing on the maximum pressure campaign, making consistent press statements and public statements together, and then publicizing those. And I think when we have trilateral meetings amongst our countries as well, we have make sure we have good press conferences and interviews so that we can relay that we have a united front on the DPRK issue, and that our ultimate goal is the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So I think in terms of messaging, we could use that digital diplomacy tool to do that amongst the three governments.
Okay. Another question, yes. Hi. Yes. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Sasakawa USA, and I'm from Japan-American Student Conference on Japanese side executive committee. And my question is about economic gap. I think economical gap is directly connecting to the digital gap, and people who have money can buy like more convenient devices easily, but people who do not have money can't do that. So I think, how do you guys think overcome this situation? I guess especially from the educational perspective.
Yes, I think that's why it's really important that schools offer their students, all schools offer their students a chance to interact with the internet and with online tools and understand what that is, especially in those areas where kids don't have smartphones. They might not have laptops at home. They don't have iPads. School might be their only option. So it's important to have the schools connected, have devices available, have classes that teach them different tools that are available. You know, there's like great online learning tools for learning languages that are free. There's great translation devices, or not devices, websites or downloadable things you can put on your computer that are free. And I just think having that knowledge is really important. And then after you have the tools and the devices, then also incorporating programs that can, like ours, that can connect students or that allow them to further know the world around them through the internet. So I think it's really important for governments as well to make sure that their schools are connected. Otherwise, they will be left behind, and it'll be like not being able to read, I think, almost. If you graduate from high school and you don't know how to search online, it's going to be hard. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nicole McNevin. Thank you all for coming out to speak to us today. I'm currently serving as the recruitment chair on the American Executive Committee of the Japan-America Student Conference. And I'm just wondering, all of our countries are world powers. We have a big responsibility when it comes to using digital technology and enacting digital diplomacy. And I think that allowing politicians, especially the president, to use Twitter freely is, as you said, sometimes extremely unhelpful and sometimes extremely irresponsible as well. And so I'm wondering if you think, in your opinion, that it would be a good idea for the government to enact what would be restrictions on individuals, politicians in social media, and if that would be just or what the implications of that might be.
So I seem to be the one who is probably most skeptical of Twitter and digital, but I would oppose that. Just because we have someone now in office who is not using it in the best way, I don't think it's a good reaction to go in and say, well, no one should be able to do that and take it all away. I think it's really important that politicians, especially at the local level, and we tend to think really nationally, but my suspicion is that politicians at local levels really are able to use it and speak directly to their constituents. You think about the president. Yeah, well, okay, well, he has a full American constituent, but how many of us really actually talk to him? But on the local level, where you can interact with your politicians, I think that is incredibly important. I don't have any background research to back that up, but that's kind of how I feel it would play out.
I agree with still being able to use social media and digital diplomacy platforms, especially on local, like in elections, local election officials and things like that, local and state government. That's probably one of the best ways that they're able to reach out to their constituents and the people, in their state or their county or their jurisdictions to communicate information and relay information effectively. Are there any other questions from the audience? Yes, the gentleman in the back.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all for speaking. My name is Will Heidlich, and I'm a consultant here in DC. I'm curious what you all think, if there's a consensus, at least in the United States, there's a conversation going on about the greater responsibility for the private sector, for companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, to take a more proactive role in shaping the common conversations that are happening on their mediums. I was wondering if there's a similar kind of conversation happening in Japan and Korea regarding Line and Kakao.
Well, I think the conversation in Korea right now has been somewhat stunted because they just went through a phase where their intelligence services were trying to influence the online discussion, and several of them have been put in jail. So I think that's where the conversation is in Korea right now.
No. Okay, next question.
Hello, my name is Carolyn Hoover, and I'm currently serving on the American Executive Committee. And my question really revolves around mental health. I think that's a conversation that has recently opened up in our country, and that's really positive. But something that I've noticed just recently at my high school, where we've had a lot of suicides, and just by going to college, it's really disturbing to me that social media has become the source where everyone turns, where they want to avoid an awkward conversation or when they just want to find more information. And that has resulted in a disconnect between people to people. And I think that moving on, it's really important to bring back the positive aspects of just in-person communication, because I think when people look at social media, they're either viewing a perfect image or something that's been skewed. And so my question for you is, in terms of the younger generation looking at the government, how does social media affect the future of our mental health in our country?
That's a very big question. So I don't think it's only social media that is driving this kind of, or exacerbates the mental health issues. It's any kind of messaging that will separate people out and make them feel more alone, which obviously social media helps to drive. But one of the examples is in Seoul, there's a bridge called the Mapo Bridge, and it's become quite famous because people jump off of it into the river. So as an effort to combat this, the local government put signs across there that were reading something like, "You're not alone, there is hope." And what happened was suicides increased after they put that on there. And so anytime there's this kind of messaging that takes people away from people, I think is going to fuel that.
I'd actually like to add another just kind of observation or example from my own experience, but very recently a very popular member of a Korean boy band committed suicide, I believe. And actually, from what I saw was that the response to that on social media was very incredibly collaborative. I had people messaging classmates on Kakao group chat saying, if anyone wants to talk, I'm here. And it was actually a very, very, optimistic and good thing to see. So I think that in many ways, social media can actually be a place for people to come together to talk about these issues. But yes, as you mentioned, they are, of course, very important moving forward.
Yeah, after the program going to Korea, you know that I cannot talk Korean language. Then but we can still and then when I go to the Korea, I exchange our address, Instagram address with some Korean friends, and we can share our pictures, and I can know what she is doing or what she had done or something like that. So I really kind of feel closer to her. So yeah, it is true that social media sometimes make people lonely or feel lonely and also are separated from their group or something like that. But if we can change the way of using, it can be also connecting people to people, I guess. Yeah.
But on that depends a lot about how you feel about humans overall.
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
Another question? Yes.
Hello, my name is Sang-min Lee, and I'm in charge of Korean Executive Committee in 11th Korean American Student Conference, and I'm studying pharmacy in Kyung University in Seoul, Korea. My question is, many Koreans deny to use SNS because of they thought that it is a waste of time, or it's hard to catch up the trends of SNS because in Korea there's so faster and faster changing trends. For example, Side World or Kakao Story, Band or Facebook, now Instagram. And another reason for denying the SNS is they are exhausted to hear the fake news in SNS. And I want to get each panel's thought about thinking about the problem to be solved for promote the new future digital diplomacy.
Good to begin.
So just to clarify, your question is, with all the tools that are out there and with the fake news, how do we go about what's the word? How do we go about understanding the tools that are available, or?
I'm just curious about the nowadays problem for using SNS to promote digital diplomacy.
So yeah, with what we've been doing, it hasn't. The one, I guess, issue we see is, for example, our students connect on the e-classroom that we provide for them for 6 months. But then after that, we say, okay, you should connect with each other and you can talk on Facebook or whatever. But in the US, we found that in Japan, basically no one in high school is using Facebook, okay? In the US, high school students are using Facebook, but far less than my generation. The best commonality that they have is Twitter. But in Japan, everyone is using Line, but in the US, no one knows what Line is. So I think there's also this issue of where do we connect? I just had a friend yesterday who said, texting apps are the bane of my existence, and he did a screenshot of his phone, and he had 5 different texting apps with all these 5 messages, 6, 7, because we all use my friends in Japan, I talk with them via Line. My friends around the world, I use WhatsApp. My mom, I use the iPhone text. Some people, I use Facebook chat. So it does get to be too much, and I think after time, things kind of go by the wayside because we all tend to move with one thing or several things. But I don't really have a way of how we could go about. I think it naturally just kind of happens, and it's an explosion right now of apps and different things that we can use. But I think, for example, like us, we just found something, the online tool we're using is free. We just found something that was free that works at both schools, and we just ran with it, and we're using it in a way it's not meant to be used, but we don't have money to create something else right now. So I think that's another thing. Find something that works for you and just use that one. And if you need to switch to something else, you can. But yeah, trying to do everything is too much as well. I don't know if that really answers your question.
So
but.
I think what we'll see in the future is, Twitter has the blue check mark for verified accounts. I think we'll see something emerge that it's all blue check marks, right? So everyone has to be verified. And so that way you're dealing with the person that they say that they are. We deal with this all the time in public opinion polling. It's called the social desirability bias, right? So if you sit down with someone, or let me back up. Yeah, if you sit down with someone, they're more likely to express opinions that they think are socially acceptable. The further and further they get away from people, the more the other opinions come out. So if you're sitting with someone, their opinions will be closer to what they think is socially acceptable. Call them on the phone, less so, but it's still there. But when you totally remove the human element, then all of these other opinions come out, like we've seen, like Julie had mentioned. And there is some value in knowing what people are actually thinking, even if they've been hiding them for a long time. But I think eventually we'll see some kind of fully verified thing emerge where people can communicate with the people they know there that are verified, and that'll hopefully bring some civility back to the online discourse.
Okay. Was there a question? No? Okay. Next question then. The woman right here, thank you. And there's a microphone behind you.
Thank you. I'm Paige Kittingham-Streeter with the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission. And first, just to congratulate the organizers. This is a fantastic program and panel, and the future is bright. I'm encouraged. But I'm listening to the discussion, and I'm wondering about the ability to use digital diplomacy a little bit beyond the education area that Shanti has spoken about, and a little bit more into the public policy realm. Such as sort of like track 2 dialogues and conversations. And so I'm really specifically interested in this trilateral discussion and the mechanics of it. And did all of you take advantage of and utilize any of these various digital platforms available prior to this panel? Because it seemed like it could be an opportunity to start a conversation and a dialogue on a variety of topics, and then collaborate or bring together the people face to face for further conversation that could sort of advance whatever the issue is being discussed. So I'm curious about the mechanics of not just this panel, but how the conversation with your different conferences have worked. And if you haven't done it, have you considered doing it? Is there a place for utilizing some of these different platforms to advance some of the other policy issues that we're facing?
So I think actually JASC and CASC are a prime example of this, funnily enough. So we, participate in a conference together. We're elected to become executive committee members. And then over the course of an entire year, we're connecting through Facebook, through Gmail, through Google Hangouts. We're planning together, collaborating, planning a lot. And then we get to come together and meet in person. But I really do think that JASC and CASC really, at the youth level, we really are utilizing these digital tools, and in our own way, we are acting as digital diplomats. So thank you for that question, but yeah, I think that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, and I'd agree with that. Being a past JASCer, not an EC, of course, but kind of having that experience of being accepted or attending the conference 6 months in the future, but already laying those foundations of friendship down, like I said, months before, through social media, through Google Hangouts, through Skype, through things like that. And it kind of has that thing where you meet 6 months later or so, and you're like, do we hug? Like, I feel like I know you really well, but we've never actually met. So I know that's exactly a very one way that we've kind of done that.
I think Paige raises a really great idea, in terms of, you've had these exchanges in Google Hangouts and meetings online, and then how do you take it to the next level? And again, institutionalize that. I think that's something we're thinking about in the coming year for both organizations. And just one example, this morning, I was wondering whether this event was still on because of the snow. I checked Twitter, and the Twitter account for Sasakawa said, yes, it's still on, please come this morning. So that was very helpful in terms of just how do you go through your everyday planning and the branding of this trilateral forum, of all the organizations involved. I think that's something that's definitely worth taking a closer look at.
Absolutely. Another question from the audience? Yes. The gentleman in the back here.
Ken Meyercord, TV producer. There seems like there's a danger of the World Wide Web being split up into regional webs for various reasons. Do you think that's a real possibility? And if so, what do you think y'all could do to prevent that from happening and keeping the World Wide Web worldwide?
I don't personally know anything about that, so I can't really talk about that. I don't know.
I think that's a bit beyond the scope of my work.
I think in general, English has been the language of choice for the internet. So I think whether the different regional aspects are growing or not, I think that's why we promote English learning in a lot of our cultural exchanges and educational programs. So that really binds a lot of the regions together despite the languages. So I think that will continue to be the trend in my view.
Okay. Another question. Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up.
Okay, yeah, please do. Please do.
Speaking a little bit to that point, I mean, I think at least locally, with what just happened in terms of the FCC and the net neutrality repeal, I think it's sort of really interesting concept because now, we almost, for a while, we've seen the internet as a public sphere and a public product. And personally, that's how I believe it should be. It should be this tool that's there for public use. But now with, net neutrality repeals, we're now moving into an age where we can almost privatize these lines of communication. And I think that's sort of really, really interesting and not necessarily in the best way. And again, I think it goes back to Toyo's question in terms of the economic gap. And now we're seeing, okay, so people can now charge higher prices so you can have access to high-speed internet. And I think that really compartmentalizes our ability to communicate with each other. Because now, again, if you want to say communicate at the highest, highest rate, you have to pay the highest for it. So it's really interesting that this is happening, at least in the United States. I don't know how it is, in Japan or South Korea in terms of these kinds of rules. But I think it's really interesting to see how these things are being shaped not only by the users, but by actual policies and also corporations. So to that point, I feel like we are sort of seeing a compartmentalization almost, at least, within the United States. I think that might be where we're heading if these, net neutrality guidelines aren't put back in place.
But I would also say that we tend to think of this as policy driven, that we're going to see these web breakups. We also have to remember that people in different countries like things designed in different ways, and that's what also drives some of this kind of regionalization, where if you go to a Korean website, it's designed much differently. Even the way it scrolls, the way the content is laid out, how wide it can be, all of those things matter. And so you have kind of a tiered system, right? Where there's going to be one where everyone's going to access in like Google via that, but also they're going to continue to have DOM or Naver, and those are going to be laid out in very different ways. So this tiered system, I think, will continue to exist. So I'm not that worried about seeing websites break up into different regions. I think that's actually almost natural.
Okay, is there another question or comment? Yes. Hi.
Hi, my name is Bridget Roddy. I work at the Department of State in the Office of E-Diplomacy. And I wanted to thank Julie for mentioning how digital diplomacy is now embraced by the State Department. And you mentioned Alec Ross and Jared Cohen. And one of the programs that they launched was the Virtual Student Foreign Service. And we are now at 35 agencies, so we've rebranded to be called the Virtual Student Federal Service. And our moderator is a current virtual intern with the State Department. And I wanted to ask you a question, Wallace.
Okay.
So how do you think that students being involved with work of their government contributes to digital diplomacy? And where do you see that going?
I think it's obviously, I think, in my opinion, a very good thing. If these students want to get experience in the public sector, they want to try, internships early on or type, networking opportunities with different individuals across the board in all these different departments, or public sector departments, I should say. So I think that's a really, really great thing. It does, like I say, it connects So many people, I think, I was at a meeting with the State Department yesterday, talking with Asha, who's kind of one of our, well, you know Asha, kind of our coordinator of interns, and she said there's, I think, about 1,200 or so interns this year, which really astounds me, and they're all spread across the different departments doing different types of research for their government representatives, for foreign service officers, for different individuals like that. So kind of, you know, it's just, I have nothing but positive things to say about it, and how, you know, like we will connect, we'll again do Google, Skype, use different digital media platforms to kind of do research or provide research to, again, those FSOs, those government representatives, for them to then go and, you know, compile that information or put it in such a way to where they can distill it in their location, whether it's domestically or internationally. So that's just a fantastic program. Going into, you know, 2018 and beyond, I think it's important for sure, with the rise of technology and how we're approaching digital diplomacy, to kind of keep that up, and to just ensure that, you know, a high quality level of communications being used by state actors, by non-state actors, by the student interns, kind of just seeing how that goes. So I think if that answered your question, or if that answered kind of the general direction of that, that's my view on it and my experience. So another question? Thank you, Bridget. The gentleman over here, yes.
So going back to what Carl said about his projection for kind of a verified system, or a more Korea-like system for the internet, I wonder how that would, how you view that as, I guess, negatively impacting the usefulness of this forum. Essentially, I look at diplomacy as being a two-way thing rather than a, you know, a one-way, hey, we're telling you what we think or what we want you to think. But essentially, if you're re-injecting that civility into it, you're losing the honesty, which honestly was very helpful for predicting things like Brexit or even Trump's election. So maybe if you could speak to that, and possibly also Julie.
Yeah, so I wasn't necessarily speaking about the internet as a whole, but just one kind of social networking service, like just on that, where people can go on and eliminate all of the trolls, eliminate all of just the people who are trying to start trouble, who just want to argue. So in terms of that, but I do think you're right, there is a lot of value, as Julia pointed out before, of getting real opinions and understanding exactly where we are as a country. You know, and of a lot of the racism that has come out. These are things that we knew were there, but were always under kind of the radar, and now suddenly it's bubbled out into full view. And I think, you know, that has been right now not positive, but it's making us deal with it as a country. And so eventually, I think there will be something good that comes out of it. So anytime you're talking about, you know, real name system, verified systems, it can be problematic because inevitably, you know, that social desirability bias will tend to suppress what people are really thinking.
And this is where, you know, all the risks are there with this amazing, great tools that we see in digital diplomacy, and we have to accept the bad along with the good. And you know, when I was in Bangkok, we had several trolls trolling our ambassador there, Christy Kenny, at the time, and some of the tweets really got to a violent level, and we had to, you know, utilize contact the local government and have the police security services investigate. But these are things that we have to live with and adapt to. And you know, again, I still believe in that connectivity, as you said. It's got to be a call and response. It can't be just a one-way communication. So whatever risks and challenges there are, we have to find ways to adapt to that.
I think we have time for one more question, if there are any more from the audience. Yes, right here.
Hi, my name is Shinji Hasegawa. I'm serving as a chair for Japan side for JASC. And my question will be like, how do you organize the information by yourself? Like, there's too much information in like SNS and Twitter, YouTube, and it's really hard to organize myself. Like, it's really chaotic, and information goes fast, and it's keep going on and moving, and it's though there's like all the information flows and flows and flows. So how does like people read news or watch news or organize your, like in your brain? yourself? Do you have any tools for using that, or like, I'm just curious how do people organize information yourself?
So for me, number one is to accept the fact that you can't read everything. You're just going to miss a lot of stuff. That's how it's going to be. But even though I'm the most skeptical person up here about some of these things, I love Twitter. Twitter's great if you use it for the right people, right? So as much as I know that there are all these other things that go on Twitter, I rarely see any of that. I have a very curated list of people who I know are going to put together good news outlets, are going to provide commentary. And for me, it's actually a great way to stay in touch with what people are thinking outside of what they're writing. Right? So what they write and their own running commentary, things that are just breaking or before they have a chance to actually more formally write it down, it's a really great outlet. And so I think you just have to be careful about who you're following and be ruthless about cutting people. Right? They might be your friends, but if they're not providing some of that content, just cut them and connect with them in person.
It's a great note to kind of wrap everything up and end on. I think that was about the end of the time for our digital diplomacy panel. I want to thank all of our speakers again, Ayano, Carl, Julie, Rebecca, and Shanti for their information and the discussion and the questions. It was really wonderful. So I'd like to give them a round of applause if that's possible. Thank you. So we're going to take about a 15-minute break, so you can get coffee, kind of stretch your legs, and then our next panel will begin at 10:30. Thank you.